Okay, good morning, Year 12. Sorry for the delay in getting this to you. I did try yesterday, but between my two sons needing help with their various school tasks and the building work going on outside, it wasn't the best scenario for doing it. And then when I did try to do it, I realised I'd messed it up anyway and missed out a couple of slides. So hopefully now we've got the correct PowerPoint and I will be able to do a video without interruption. Okay, so here goes. So self-report, that covers ultimately questionnaires and interviews. So this should be a relatively comfortable topic, to be honest, particularly for those of you who do sociology. A lot of our research methods doesn't cross over with sociology, but this certainly does. So hopefully some familiar terms here. So questionnaires, I'm sure you've all completed questionnaires before. Getting the person's views on topics, asking them to judge their emotions, feelings, and there's various ways of doing this. You need to know about how to structure a questionnaire. You might be asked to suggest some potential questions. So open and closed questions is the key thing to consider. Open questions gives the participant freedom in their response to put what they want, how they want, leads to qualitative data, so in the form of sentences, whereas closed questions restricts them. You've got a range of options, and that leads to mainly quantitative data. When I do sort of feedback forms, student feedback forms, I tend to do a bit of both. I don't do too many open questions because, as we'll see, it is harder to come to any conclusions from them. They take much more time to analyse, whereas with closed questions, when I'm giving people scales to do ratings on, it's very easy to come up with averages and comparisons. So I tend to do a bit of both. So pros and cons. Open questions hopefully take away the researcher bias at least a bit, because you're not directing the people. They've got that bit more freedom in what they say. I have seen some questionnaires in certain places that seem to be worded in a certain way that's nudging you towards an answer, whereas if you've got that freedom, then hopefully you'll be that bit more honest rather than just doing what the researcher is almost consciously or unconsciously pushing you to do. It is, as I've said, in greater depth. These open questions will give you greater depth. If I ask you about how much you've enjoyed Year 12 psychology, and I give you lines to write a response, that's going to tell me more than you circling a 6 out of 10 on a scale. Okay, so we've got that. Throughout all of this, though, we do have the issue of social desirability bias, where people might put down what they feel is the acceptable thing to put down rather than their own views. I might have mentioned before, at uni we did do some very controversial topics in questionnaires. I won't go into it now, but it was, when you read it, it's like, oh, okay. And even though it's confidential, even though nobody would know that it's my views or be able to link those views to me, there was this huge pressure to sort of maybe nudge things along a scale a bit to what you feel is the right answer. So that runs through all of these, so you do have to bear that in mind. I don't think that point's unique to this. Social desirability bias is always something that you need to look out for. But then the more straightforward one, it is more difficult to draw conclusions. So if I had 40 odd paragraphs talking about enjoyment of psychology, yeah, I've got that depth, but it's very hard for me to start looking at that. We'll do content analysis further down the line, and that's what I would have to do before I could even start to draw conclusions. Whereas if people have been circling 1 to 10 scale, then I could very easily do my summary, do my data, and all of that. Okay, so pros and cons of open questions. And as with a lot of things in research methods, it's the flip side for closed questions. So much easier to analyse. Bit graph, whatever you want to do, averages, you can do that. You can identify trends very easily. But it is superficial. You may well miss important things. You're slapping down these scales. They're restricted in their responses. They might not be able to get across what they want to. I always find it hugely irritating when people annotate a questionnaire. I did questionnaires at uni for my final piece of work, and some people sort of wrote little essays down the side of it. They wanted it to be open questions, but I didn't take it into account because I was focusing on my set questions that I'd asked. So it can be superficial. And there is also the issue of response bias. A lot of the time when we're filling in questionnaires, we really don't want to be filling in questionnaires, can't be bothered. And it's like, oh, okay. There is a risk of people going, yeah, 5, 5, 5, don't know, yes, whatever, can I just go now? It used to be at the end of lectures, so you just sat through a 2-hour lecture. Okay, before you go, can you please fill out this questionnaire for this person? There is a risk that you're not even going to read it properly, so you have to be careful with that. There are ways of checking against it. You can, if you're watching out for this and being clever with how you design your questionnaire, you can sort of repeat questions worded in a slightly different way. You can flip the scale so that then if somebody's showing huge inconsistency, you know they're not really being honest. Okay, so it could be worded in one way where the lower score would be the positive, then you could reword it in a way where the higher score would be the positive. It's like those dodgy, at the end of forms where they went about the marketing and things like that, and they word it in awkward ways. It's a bit like that. And you can pick up on people who really aren't reading this properly, and their responses may not be particularly valid. Okay, so pros and cons of open questions, closed questions. You've got to think what's going to get you the best data for your study, what's going to give you the best insight, what realistically are you going to be able to analyse effectively within timescales and with budgets and things like that. Yeah, designing a questionnaire. I love getting stuck into NAF questionnaires that come around, particularly when it comes to Enterprise Week. You've got these questions that just don't make sense, or they ask 3 questions within one question. You think, well, hold on a second, I haven't answered the first one yet. They make huge assumptions about what you do or what you don't do. It's not clear if they're talking about an individual or a group. They're often a mess. Okay, so questionnaires, keep it simple, nice and clear terminology, no grey areas there, as short as possible. People generally don't want to be filling in questionnaires, so your best chance of getting them to actually think about it is to keep it as concise as possible, not having loads of extra stuff that isn't really needed. Be sensitive with how you're doing things, personal information at the end, so that's not distracting for them. Don't use leading questions. So if I was doing enjoyment of the psychology course, I could word it in a way that's saying, yay, how would you rate your enjoyment of psychology? And so it's not explicit, but it's still maybe giving you a little bit of a nudge there. As I said, don't make assumptions about people. And the last one that we've talked about already, piloting. If you're doing, as I did at uni, multiple questionnaires, duplicating them, the postage to send them out, you need to know that they work. You need to know that people know how to read them, the questions make sense, they know how to put down their response, whether it's circling a number or whatever they've got to do, ticking a box. So you'd want to do a pilot study first, that small scale version, prototype of your questionnaire, just to make sure that everything is as it should be. A lot of enterprise students could do doing some pilot studies. That's questionnaires. Moving on to interviews. So another form of self-report. If you ever see self-report, remember, if it doesn't say anything else, you've got questionnaires and interviews at your disposal. It's always frustrating if students don't realise what they can talk about. So self-report, interviews and questionnaires, usually face-to-face, obviously at the moment with how things are, by phone, or a lot of video chats and things like that have really taken off. So that would be another option for an interview. 3 options: structured, unstructured, semi-structured. So structured interview, interviewer knows exactly what questions are going to be asked in advance, asked in the same order for each participant. They'll also have an interview schedule where they're ticking boxes or making brief notes. Tutor interviews, there's a document that you're working your way through. So those are structured. A bit like the questionnaires, the more structure you have, the easier it is to analyse. easy to replicate. So if a study uses structured interviews, then it's much easier for somebody else to then replicate that study exactly using those same interviews to test for reliability. But yeah, it could miss something important. So if I sit there with somebody in my tutor group and I work my way through a form, if I only do those questions, then there's a risk that actually there might be something quite important that's not touched upon. So you do have to bear that in mind. And yes, there is that increased risk of investigator bias because they're really running the show. They're leading the interview in this instance. So they could, through their tone or style of questioning, be nudging that person away from their honest opinion. Flip side of this, unstructured, more like a general chat, conversation, discussion. Yes, the interviewer facilitates it. The interviewer makes it happen, but beyond the general topic, anything goes. So the participant leads things much more in an unstructured interview. A lot of data will be provided. Highly unlikely you're going to be able to scribble this down as you go. So they may well be recorded, be it the audio or video, so that they can be analysed later on. It's not nice when you're talking to somebody and they're sort of looking down like this, okay, yeah. That really kills the atmosphere, the connection there. So chances are be recorded so they can have that decent conversation. Reduces the risk of investigator effects because they're not driving what's going to be said here. The participant is coming up with what they want to say. Rich source of data, great depth to it. You can follow up on things. You've got that freedom and flexibility to explore things. So if they come up with something rather than saying, oh, that's not on the list, you'll think, oh, okay, that's interesting. Well, tell me more about that. Okay, so it might give you a greater insight into things that would be otherwise missed. But it is costly, time consuming. We've talked about the practicalities when it comes to research methods. You've got to think about time, money, and things like that. Probably going to need some sort of training, maybe a trained psychologist to have an unstructured interview. You can't have anybody do that. Whereas with a structured interview, if they've just got to ask these questions and note down the responses, in theory anybody could do that. Whereas with the unstructured interviews, you're going to need that training as well, and yes, more difficult to analyse. So the same trade-offs. We're talking about similar things. So you might go for semi-structured, as you might expect. It's a mixture. Yes, there's pre-prepared questions, but like I said with my questionnaires, maybe that bit of flexibility at the end. Okay. Now, because this has an element of both, it comes with the pros and cons of both. So it does hopefully reduce that social desirability, as they can actually talk about why they feel this way rather than just saying, oh, yes. They can actually go into it and say, well, why do you enjoy psychology so much? You've got that depth of data from the unstructured element, but then it still is being driven more by the interviewer than if it was a completely unstructured interview. So that investigator effect risk creeps in again, and for the unstructured element, it's going to be more difficult to draw conclusions. So for this, if it includes both aspects, structured, unstructured, it's going to have the pros and cons of structured and unstructured. Okay, so that's what I'm after this week. I know I've had at least one completed already. So for the rest of you, please read the full section. Please read the textbook spread. I say it every time, and it does worry me that these questions aren't hard with the material that you've got available to you. And when you've got the right answer in front of you, I can't penalise you for giving me that same wording back. I do get that, but you've got to make sure that you understand this. You've got to be confident with it. You really are. You're not doing yourselves any favours if you just skip the video, just get the book open. Okay, that's that. Oh, that's brilliant. That only took me 10 minutes. You're tripping yourself up. Okay, you will come unstuck big time next year. You've got to really know this stuff. Okay, so lecture over. Just read the blooming textbook and the topic companion. complete the answers on the sheet. I don't think I've made too many amendments this time, and that is due on Friday. This is the last formal task. If you've read my email from a couple of days ago, I do want to keep on with research methods for the summer tasks as well. Not all of it. There's just things that really I would have wanted done this academic year. I'm very keen to still do everything that we would have done this academic year, given that while we hope for normality in September, we really don't know what the year is going to bring. Okay, so research methods has got to be as secure as possible. Okay, so this is due Friday, and then I'll set you up with the remaining tasks that I want done over the summer. I'm sure a lot of you will probably blitz it straight away just to get it out of the way. It's fine. Okay, right, thank you very much. Have a great weekend. Bye.